You know what would make a fun video? Property tax and non-profit organizations. I saw an infographic that said if churches paid property tax, we'd have another $8 billion in food stamps. I'm going to make this video from the grounds of ignoring the questions if property tax is good and necessary, and if the food stamp program is the most efficient way to help the poor. Just going to ignore that outright. So the knee-jerk reaction might be, this is a great idea. Churches have lots of money, property tax isn't much, there's lots of churches, so it should be an easy source of revenue for the government for a good cause, which would be people getting food stamps. To understand why this is problematic, we have to understand a couple things about nonprofit organizations, local and federal taxes. So let's get into some stuff. The United States is a federal government. There are several levels of government. There's the national level of government, which is the president, Congress, and they have their judges. Then there's a state level of government, where there's a governor, there's a Supreme Court, and then every state has its own Congress and House, or Congress or House or way of representative that makes laws for the state. And then cities. Well, then it can be broken down by cities or counties depending on the population, where could be a committee that runs everything, there are judges, and there are state and local laws that are drafted by either a community or a mayor. Every state is a little bit different because states themselves have sovereignty over their own control. So there isn't one way to do everything, but there's generally a way. And the difference in the states is one reason why this why property tax won't quite work. Now, every level of government has a tax and handles a tax. So states are literally an amalgamation of land. So property tax is handled by the state. So as you travel there, as you look around you, you can see roads that are different things. The road behind my camera is a local road. It was made by the city, paid for, and paved. The road behind me is a state road. That road was paid for by the state. And the road that the state road connects to is has an I by it. That means it's an international road, which means it's paid for by federal tax dollars that come down so that the entire country can be connected. Right. So states are literally the group of land that make up the United States. So property tax is done by the state, and then the money goes to the state. There isn't any money from property tax that goes outside of the state, unless individual states can vary, and it's a little bit of a thing. So a section of the money collected from property tax is going to go to the state's needs, and a section's going to go to the local town's needs. And that money is used to run a lot of the things that are directly around people. It pays judges, police officers, schools, paves roads, all the good things that people want their taxes to go to. Next thing you understand what a nonprofit organization is. There are several types of nonprofit organizations. There are charities, there are churches, and then there are some schools. These are organizations that come together and they say, we're going to take up land, and this organization will own something, but we're not looking to make a profit. The thing you have to remember about religious institutions is they aren't just these big ogres. They're a collection of people, because they're not there to make money, they're there to worship. For example, there are a lot of churches that don't even have a church. They meet in people's houses, they borrow a local church, they can meet in schools, wherever they rent a space to be, they can just meet out in the park. And technically that is still a church gathering in a park. It doesn't make the park a church, all but temporarily. So when drafting this law, they would have to change other laws that are already on the books about what's a nonprofit organization and why should we just stop doing this. And then if you do just single out the churches, that is discrimination. The next thing you need to understand is federal government and the things that federally they do. So the federal government comes in to make laws when it comes to other countries and when it comes to connecting all the states together. That's why the federal government takes over big lots like Mediacom, internet providers, national radio stations. they all answer to the federal government. And they'll also make rules that have to blanket over all of the states. Okay, one of the things federal government does is health services, which includes food stamps. So food stamps is paid for by federal taxes. What's an example of a federal tax? Well, the biggest federal tax the two biggest federal taxes are income tax and sales tax. If you have a job, every week you get a paycheck. But every week there's something called withholdings, and that money goes directly to the government, and they hold it and they pay for taxes, and it doesn't count against you, and they use that for their programs. Also, every time you buy something in America, they'll add 7 to 10% of that will be added on as tax, and that is the sales tax. Now, the basic sales tax is about 6%, and that's the minimum. And with that, one of that 6 goes directly to the state. Now, depending on the state you live in or the area you live in, the sales tax fluctuates. So the lowest sales tax possible is 6%. The highest is 10%. In my city, the sales tax is 7%. That extra percent goes locally, because we had a flood a couple of years ago, and that money is going to help relieve everything. Now, it's depending on the state, that's what fluctuates how much extra the sales tax is. But at least 1% of sales tax will go to the federal healthcare services. So there's actually 2 major flaws to our premise. Make churches pay property tax, that money will go to food stamps. So the first flaw is that the money stays local in the state. It's a state tax. So it does not get to the federal government's, any of the federal government's programs, including food stamps. The second flaw is that churches already pay a lot for food stamps. So churches may not pay property tax, but they do pay one tax that we all have to pay, and that is sales tax. Of course, they don't have an income tax because they're a non-profit organization, so they don't have an income that should be taxable. But churches still buy things. They buy wood, they buy office supplies, they buy books, they buy pews, and all that needs to be taxed. Because the only things that are exempt from sales tax are retailers that have to charge tax for the items. And then let's not forget that a church isn't just an organization, but it's also a group of people. And each of those group of people have an income and pay income tax and their own sales tax. So not only do the individual members contribute to the food stamps as much as any other person does, but they also do a second time through their church's needs of buying things. I am not Will Wheaton. My mouth is dry. Yeah, you can put one in my round for hating Reddit. Me.